Good evening, everyone. My name is Joey Busey. I'd like to thank you all for attending the inaugural Assistant Speaker Series event featuring our scholarship speaker, David Hogg.
My name is Alex Hamill. Tonight you will hear a little bit about our story, our mission, and our format. After that, we move to a fireside chat moderated by Cole Cherian featuring David Hogg. After that, we move to an audience Q&A moderated by Sumant Sharma.
Assistant Speaker Series is a student-created and student-led series dedicated to celebrating positive stories of social impact and empowering the next generation of social entrepreneurs and activists. To fulfill this mission, Citizen sources compelling speakers who have had a positive social impact in their own community. In lieu of a traditional speaking fee, Citizen Scholarship speakers will be recognized and named with a dedicated Citizen Scholarship, which will go out to an individual who is a high-achieving student and would not otherwise have been able to attend Malvern Prep.
To make this the best event possible, we are strictly focusing on David's personal story and path to success. We ask that you do the same when asking questions. Please only ask questions about his personal story and advice he has for young social entrepreneurs.
This event, this format, and this mission is a culmination of 18 months of hard work that has been put together from our team. This all started from an idea which my good friend Cole had to create the Citizen Speaker Series and create a series at Malvern Prep centered around social impact. Throughout this, we've gone through many challenges, even including overcoming a global pandemic.
So how did this go from Cole sending Sumant a text message freshman year to you all watching our inaugural event online? Well, throughout our journey, we experienced many large setbacks, but also had many large leaps forward.
Throughout pitching, fundraising, branding, there have been many setbacks, which our team has had to adapt to and overcome quickly. Due to our faith-centered background and project-based learning background, which we've been attending Malvern Prep since middle school, we've been able to overcome these challenges as a team.
This would have been possible without the time, commitment, energy, and creativity of our mentor and advisor, Mr. Michael Reardon, in addition to the help and commitment of Mr. Patrick Silp, the Malvern administration, the Malvern leadership team, Mr. Lou Colomeco and the alumni, Billy Mulray in the Malvern TV studio, our families, and last but not least, our Malvern brothers. Tonight, our scholarship speaker is David Hogg. David Hogg is survivor of the 2018 Parkland shooting and co-founder of the March for Our Lives. He currently attends Harvard University and will be zooming in with us tonight from Florida.
With that being said, I'd like to introduce my good friend and chairman of Citizen, Cole Cherian.
Thanks, Joey and Alex. David, thank you for joining us tonight to share your story. I know when we were planning this event last year, we were really excited to have everyone on campus and to showcase the St. Augustine Center for Social Impact. But I'm grateful and glad that we were able to get something to happen tonight and that our audience will be able to hear your story, your citizen moment, and be able to ask you questions at the end.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for having me, Cole. It's awesome that you came up with this idea, and it's really amazing. Shout out especially to the team that helped you put it together and your friends as well. They sound like great people.
Yeah. No, it was definitely a team effort, and all the people that Alex and Joey mentioned were instrumental in creating this effort. So with that said, let's get into the fireside chat. So David, many of us came to know you after the shooting on February 14th, 2018. But tell us about the David Hogg before you and your school endured a community-wide tragedy and were thrown into the national spotlight.
Yeah, so before the shooting, I really was kind of frankly, just a nerdy 17-year-old that really focused a lot of my time in my TV production class, because at the time I was interested in becoming like a news broadcaster possibly, or doing, just telling other people's stories. I did a lot of work as well in speech and debate, arguing around topics such as the use of drones and the pros and cons of that, and having to argue both sides, the use of, issues around gun violence in the United States even, and having to argue around that as well. Before the shooting, I moved in the middle of my freshman year because my father has Parkinson's disease and we couldn't afford to live in California anymore, in part because of that. So we moved to Florida where we had family that lived out there. And as a result of moving in the middle of my freshman year, I didn't have many friends when I got to school. I'd always grown up hearing really amazing stories from people like my father, who's now a medically retired FBI agent, and my mom, who worked in predominantly low-income communities as a public school teacher. One thing I kind of always struggled with was I didn't know what my story was. And when I got to Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, I kind of decided to find that story through telling other people's through the use of the camera. And, it also just, as a final thought, kind of, having a camera is kind of like the ultimate excuse to be anywhere in school. So it was useful as a new student because I didn't need I didn't need a date to go to homecoming. I didn't need a date to go to prom, even if I wasn't a senior or whatever. I could just be there with my camera and have that as my excuse while telling other people's stories. So yeah. I think you're on mute, Cole.
Sorry. David, my grandfather has Parkinson's disease, and I understand the toll it can take on a family. But tell us more about your home life. Were your parents particularly interested in social impact?
Yeah, I think both my parents were very interested in social impact, although not at the scale, obviously, that my sister and I are now involved. My mom, my first protest, I like to say, was when I think I was 3 or 4 years old, with my mom doing a protest with the National Education Association and Teachers Union. And, my father got involved in government and working in, helping to help, really with the goal of helping to protect people and support them. So I guess in their own unique ways, it wasn't necessarily outside of the system that they did the work. They did most of it from the inside, whether it was my mom teaching a first generation, second English learner student how to read, or my father helping to, figure out how to find people that, help find kids, for example, that their parents may have kidnapped or working on that and stuff. So yeah, they were always very interested in helping other people in their own ways. And I saw this sacrifice and work that it took from them to help raise my sister and I, especially because the cost of living was so high, and teachers never get paid enough, really. But yeah, because of that, I saw a lot of value in it. I was also a Boy Scout, and because the shooting happened right literally the weekend after I did my Eagle project, I didn't end up becoming an Eagle Scout, but I learned a lot through that process, and it helped me really learn more about how, in some ways, when you give to your own community, and I swear this might sound cliche, especially to some teenagers that are like, yeah, whatever, like, I'm gonna focus on myself. But I found that when I help other people, it actually has a mutual benefit for myself as well, where I feel good about it too. So yeah, that's.
Well, David, let's now fast forward to February 14th, 2018. Take us through that day.
Yeah, so on February 14th, I was just at school, and I had been in my, I basically got through school, did everything usual. I was working on some stuff related to my Eagle Scout project that I had done the weekend before. And then I ended up in after that, I ended up in my AP Environmental Science class. We're there because it was a relatively cool and freezing February day in Florida because it was 70 degrees. It was one of the few days a year that we could have the doors to our classroom open. So we could hear everything outside. And as a classmate and I are working on our assignment, we hear a pop go off outside. And, we both look at each other and kind of say like, hey, that sounded like a gunshot. In agreement, we look back and tell our teacher, we thought it could have been an active shooter drill, as sadly is so common these days. So we just tell our teacher, not thinking much of it, and she closes the door. But the second, when she closes the door, the fire alarm goes off. And when the fire alarm went off, we just got up and did our usual thing. We started walking out to our, evacuation zone or whatever. And on our way out there, I soon realized that this wasn't just, a normal fire evacuation, because all of a sudden there was like a flood of students running past me. And as we all know, like it's not very easy to get, just random high schoolers to be running. So obviously something was up. I still thought it was probably an active shooter drill at the time. So I was like, whatever. Like so I did instinctually, I guess I just kind of started running with them. But unknowingly at the time, I was running with all of them in the direction of where the shooting was actually occurring, which was in the building right next to mine, which was the freshman building. And as we're running towards the building, and at the time the shooter was trying to shoot out the third floor window to basically hit students from a higher perspective or whatever. Some school administrator stopped us and said, like, don't come this way, he's over here. And as they said that, right next to us, a culinary teacher opened up her classroom and got all of us in there, not knowing where the shooter was or if there were multiple or what was going on at the time. She got us in her classroom and hid us in there. Where at the time, throughout high school, whenever I was in an uncomfortable situation, the thing I naturally did was lean for my camera. So that's what I did. I took my camera out and started interviewing students during the shooting, using my relatively amateur journalistic experience in the TV production program, so that if we were to die in that classroom, we could ask students what they thought about not only gun violence, but what they thought about gun laws, because we always hear like, oh, stop politicizing these tragedies and stuff, right? But in reality, if the people that were to die in this were to say that that they wanted this change to happen in the first place, it'd be really hard to argue against that. And knowing the effectiveness of those things, and wanting to make sure that people realize like this stuff just can't continue. We need to realize like these are kids. These are my classmates and stuff. So that in the event, if we were killed, hopefully, even if our bodies were left behind on the classroom floor, our voices would carry on, and create some form of change that's so clearly needed. But luckily, we made it out. So SWAT team came in like 2 hours after we got in the classroom, told everybody to get to the ground, and they filed us outside where I went. That day, my sister was a freshman at the time, and she was on the other side of campus, and after I had gotten out, I went and saw my dad, and I just went straight home and left him behind to come and pick him up later when my sister eventually got out. And when that happened, I was just thinking to myself, like, I was just in shock, basically. And a couple hours later, my father called me to ask me to come back to pick him and my sister up. And when she got in the car, she was just uncontrollably crying to an extent that I had never heard before. And it made me physically pained me to hear that, because, you can't do anything in that situation to make it better. So after we got home, and knowing that, it was really the first time in my life that I couldn't do anything to make it better for my sister, I did what the only thing that I knew how to do, not even knowing if at the time whether or not anyone I had known had died in the shooting. I decided to go out and make sure, because I knew that these things had like a news cycle of like at maximum a week or 2 weeks. And then the country moves on and people just think of, it's just part of life. It happens, right? But I didn't want my school to be like that. I wanted there to be some form of change. So I went out and did what I knew how to do best, not as a journalist per se, or kind of like a journalist actually in the beginning, just to tell the story of what happened that day, to make people realize that, these had human costs. So I went back to the school after being there earlier to do interviews, because I didn't want talking heads talking about what happened in my school that day and debating it, and then the country moving on and being like, oh, whatever, couldn't have done anything, right? Which is just, in my opinion, utterly ridiculous. We can always do something. I spoke, and that's kind of what happened that night. And then I got home that night at like 3 a.m, and then went back on the news the next morning at like 5 a.m. with like 2 hours of sleep, and just kept going like that until a bunch of other stuff started happening with my friends. And
Yeah, David. So I've read the articles and I've seen the headlines, but when you describe that story, it's just so much more powerful. So thank you for sharing. At Citizen, we believe that the most powerful way to share stories of social impact is to focus around what we call the citizen moment. Now, this is the point in one's life in which they decide to become dedicated to making a change. So David, if you had to pick apart that day, what was your citizen moment?
I think it was realizing that like no one like my sister, who we would later find out at the time lost 4 friends that day at the age of 14, should ever have to go through that. I think it was hearing like her crying so much that and making me so uncomfortable that I realized like we all of us have to stop relying on other people and hoping that somebody else is going to fix these problems for us, because no one's going to save us. It's really us, that got to save us, if that makes sense. And that's kind of what I decided. I'm like, even if we don't succeed, I mean, at least we tried. What other option do we have? And I think that's one thing I would really like to drive home to like everyone is like, I really hope that no one waits the way that I did, frankly, to get involved for something to deeply personally affect you. But sadly, that's what happens a lot of the time is we see these things as isolated incidences that are not going to affect us until they do. And then by then it's too late. And I really hope that everyone takes action on whatever they care about hopefully before it personally affects them. Or if there is something that has personally affected them, that they're able to do that. But if I had to pick a moment in that day, I guess it would just be like my sister crying and realizing that, I felt a sense of responsibility given my experience and knowledge from speech and debate and TV production to tell the story of what happened that day and make sure that people realize like no matter who wanted to speak, that they would have the ability to do so on their own terms. It wasn't going to be the media telling them like, hey, sorry, it's been more than a week since like one of the largest school shootings in American history. We don't care now because it's not newsworthy because we have, we have better stuff to cover or whatever. And I just didn't want that to happen. So that's, I guess you could say that was kind of my citizen moment, was when pushed by the pushed emotionally by the trauma that my sister and many of my classmates had experienced that day, to go up there and speak for those that couldn't, like my sister at the time.
Yeah. David, you already shared what you did initially to take action, but over 1 million people came out around the world to support the March for Our Lives on March 24th, 2018, just a month after the shooting happened. Now, getting 1 million people out to support an idea is impressive just in and of itself, but just a month after is just astounding. So how did you pull that off? How did you organize the March for Our Lives?
Well, that's a really long story, but in short, basically a bunch of my friends and I got together. I got a text from a friend of mine that said, hey, like, you want to come over to my house? We're trying to, figure out how to plan some stuff to happen. And, talking to him and stuff, we kind of settled, by we, I mean, like basically a group of like 20 or maybe 25 people decided that we wanted to do a march on Washington. And, we would launch a GoFundMe to help raise money for that. And as a result of that, we raised several $1 million, much of that money, going to the march, but also working to help support our community and help it heal at the same time with some of those funds. As part of that, I think what it really came down to is just effective delegation and everyone doing what they knew how to do best. There were some former alumni that had siblings at school that day. Such as my friend Brendan Duff, who was at school to get a degree in communications, and he helped us run a lot of our press and coordinate it. I had some friends that had experience in campaigning and political organizing that helped us organize that and just different aspects. In my role, I really focused on the media and initially policy at the beginning, just because I was one of the most well-versed people in it at the time because of my experience in speech and debate. As a result of us going out there and speaking to the media that was there, encouraging young people to use the anger that we all felt at the time to take action, to register to vote, to march and join together across the country to do this. We ended up having, over 800, basically, I think it was like 800 more marches around the world and on every inhabited continent, with over 1 million people in DC. So yeah, like I could be here all night explaining how all of that happened, but that's really the gist. Is like we all came together and frankly just worked incredibly hard. I had never worked so hard in my life before, to the point of just like, it's a type of exhaustion emotionally and physically where you can like feel it in your bones and you just want to like collapse half the time. But that's what it took, and that's what we did.
Yeah. So tragically, shootings like the one you and your classmates experienced, they're not new. What was new with the March for Our Lives was that the young people affected used their voice to make an impact. Using what you learned along this very long journey, as you mentioned, what would you say to a Malvern Prep student who wants to make his own impact?
I would say, there's a lot of things that you could do. First, I would say find something that you really care about, that either you or someone you know is personally affected by, or I mean, even if it's not that, just find something that you care about, and first educate yourself on it as much as you can to learn about it and understand, in the case of gun violence prevention, the policies that go in around it and everything like that. And once you've done that and you've decided that you want to make this change, what I would suggest is starting. This might be kind of hypocritical coming from me, but starting small, I guess, and respecting that, because with us, it took kind of a relatively small act in comparison to the march to help prepare us for how to do the march, which was my friend Jacqueline Corin organizing basically buses to go up to Tallahassee very shortly after the shooting to lobby our state government for stronger gun laws. And what I would say for any individual is just think about how, if you want to help create change in your own community, think about, in the case of, if you actually, Cole, I think what you've done with this series is a good example. You just have an idea, you talk to some people about it, and you create a plan to make it happen, and you just persistently keep working with the understanding that failure is only the end of success if you let it be. It's otherwise it's just part of it. I could be here all night telling you about the number of times that I failed planning random things and stuff, but it's just, the only reason we succeeded is because we kept going, right? We didn't listen to people that said that we couldn't get more than 1,000 people up to Washington, D.C., or the people that said that you can't change gun laws in Florida because the state legislature is just not going to do that. It was by not listening to those that said that we couldn't and believing that we could, that we were able to make that change. So I think that's really one of the best ways to go about it. Just fighting for something that you believe in. And also just, one of the best and one of the worst things about young people is we get really angry really quickly a lot of the time. But that is a surprisingly effective tool for creating political and social change, because comfortable politicians don't change things. It's only through uncomfortability that things change in politics. And young people are in a very unique position, as we all know, to create some good trouble and make people uncomfortable in good ways.
David, you mentioned this a bit, but us just having this conversation via Zoom is one of the many examples of the disruption that COVID has caused. Could one of the silver linings of this pandemic be that young people our age have had the opportunity to build and practice resilience? And what can your experience with resilience teach us about its importance?
Yeah, I think it's important to realize that, sometimes there's a certain amount of resilience that is necessary for natural things that are inevitably going to happen. But a lot of the things within our society are not things that we should have to be resilient around. Frankly, if governments around the world handled the COVID-19 epidemic better, it would have remained an epidemic and not become a pandemic, likely. And there certainly would have been as many people that have died. I think secondly, when it comes to resilience, I think we need to question at what times, should we be okay with having to have resilience, right? Yes, we had resilience after the shooting, to get up and keep fighting as thousands of kids across the country do that, lose people to gun violence and do work in communities that experience gun violence on a daily basis. But also, should we, what does that say about our leaders in that we are expected to have resilience to overcome things that shouldn't happen in the first place, right? It shouldn't require students themselves getting up to demand change to end gun violence in our schools and our communities on a daily basis, because we should have adults and elected officials that do that, but we don't, sadly. I wouldn't even consider many of the people that are currently in power leaders even, because if you can't protect fundamentally the most important thing to protect, which is our young people from violence and harm, what are you doing, right? But I think sadly, when we live in these kind of dystopian situations, it requires resilience from young people to challenge the status quo and to get up after setbacks repeatedly. Because I can tell you, anytime you try to create change, you are inevitably going to fail a lot. I hope you don't, but realistically, like, everyone fails a lot, everyone messes up. But the key is just taking care of yourself, making it seems simple enough, but like really making sure you get enough sleep, making sure you have good friends around you that you check in with, making sure you eat food, which is easy to forget, surprisingly. And, just taking care of yourself overall and doing stuff that you enjoy in tandem with activism or organizing is really key, because, change is made a lot of the time, it's made over the decades. It's not made over one election. And it's going to require all of us persistently working to make the world a better place over many elections to do that. And, what's really key, I found, is just taking care of yourself and knowing that, yes, as young people, myself as a 17-year-old, when I started, I might have felt invincible, but there's a really tough world out there. And you will realize that either by avoiding it or by learning the hard way, as I did, that you're not invincible, and you need to take care of yourself, because this really is a marathon, not a sprint.
And David, as I mentioned, you had 38 days to plan this March for Our Lives. Take us to day 37, that 11th hour. Just take us through that day.
Yeah. So on day 37, basically we all showed up to we were all in our hotel. We went downstairs to get briefed and everything and talk about the run of show. Frankly, a lot of us were we wanted to speak, but also we were scared because there were so many people. There was such a high possibility of people possibly trying to kill us, when we were on stage, or something happening at one of the other marches while this was going on, right? And I know that was a big anxiety for me. I know it was a big anxiety for a lot of co-founders, and luckily nobody got hurt, thank God. But it's that was a big part. And then we all get up on stage. It was a beautiful day that was relatively clear, surprisingly, because it had snowed like the day before. And we just went out there one by one with like the showrunners, like telling okay, like Cameron's gonna speak first, and then then it's gonna be X person, then it's gonna be Y person, and then just going out there and stuff. And it was just a bunch of young people firing up the crowd. And one of the things that we had, though, was that nobody above the age of 18 was allowed to speak, because we wanted to focus on the kids that were at school that day and the young people across the country that were either just able to register to vote or were going to be able to register to vote in the coming years. And that's part of what we did. We also had people not from Marjorie Stoneman Douglas speak there. We had Zion Kelly as an example from DC, because he had lost his twin brother Zaire to gun violence. And he spoke about his experience. We had Edna Chavez from Los Angeles speak about her experience working on ending daily gun violence and talking about a lot of the communities around Los Angeles that are affected by gun violence on a daily basis. And we had people, some of our friends that we met basically like a week after the shooting. There were a bunch of kids from March went out to Chicago to meet up with local gun violence prevention activists that do this work on a daily basis and talk to them. And they spoke at the march as well. They were part of the brave youth leaders of St. Sabina in Chicago. And just a bunch of other people that spoke there to show that, yes, like March was a big event, but also this work had been being done in predominantly Black and Brown communities for decades before we were there, right? And it's still going on a daily basis in Black and Brown communities, and trying to recognize in a way like how we were able to do the march largely because of the attention that the media gave us. And as a result of that was able to give us more funding. But realistically speaking, a lot of that attention in the media came from the fact that Parkland is a predominantly white community. And as a result of that, we get a disproportionate amount of media coverage. I mean, if we want to talk about mass shootings, there's a mass shooting basically every day in multiple cities across the country, but they just are individual shootings and they get covered for 30 seconds on the news because they happen in predominantly Black and brown communities. And we wanted to acknowledge that, and we still work to acknowledge that on a daily basis.
Yeah. David, and you touched on this, but many of the people who came out to support the March for Our Lives were young people and teenagers. You use your youth to your advantage to design an event truly made for this generation. You had support voiced online from influencers such as Dwayne Wade, Harry Styles, and Kim Kardashian. You integrated live performances into your event from artists such as Miley Cyrus. And how did you pull this off?
A lot of friends. That's how. A lot of people that connected with us that we then used to connect to another person. So for example, like X person would connect to us to offer their support, and we'd be like, "That's great, man. Like, can you reach out to this person?" And maybe they'll come in to support and shout us out on social media. Then once that person shouted us out, we got them to ask another person basically to shout us out and talk about it on social media. And it kind of just became a snowball effect like that. That of course played a really big role in helping promote it more through the use, I guess you could say, of it's an icky word, but like influencers, to go out there and help promote the event. And then, if somebody reached out from the music world, for example, to ask how they could support, we talked to them or even worked with them at times on how to get musical performers there, like Ariana Grande, for example, or some of the others that were there, to come out and like realize like this is really heavy stuff, but really social change and political change at its core comes from cultural change, because at the core of political power is cultural change. And what at the core of our culture is, and as a result, the core of that political power is art, it's music. And it's the way that people celebrate who they are and what they believe in, right? And by having people go out and celebrate with music, having people like AJR, for example, writing a song about us and stuff, it helped a lot in creating that cultural momentum to show the moment that we were in and help promote creating change more effectively throughout that time.
Yeah. So David, using what you learned and what you know now, is there anything that you would do differently?
I would say there's a lot of things that I would do differently. First of all, I would definitely have taken better care of myself in the first really 2 years after the march. It's very easy to fall into the trap of believing that you can work 18 hours a day for months on end and never take a break, but ultimately you just burn out as a result of that. And it's just super counterproductive. It ages you years and years. I think one thing that I would have done too is, especially in the days after the shooting. Of course, hindsight is 2020, but I would have certainly talked more about the role that white privilege played in the media coverage that we were getting, and the fact that shootings happen on a daily basis in predominantly Black and brown communities that have activism, have student organizers that do organize, that have walkouts, but when they get covered, it's completely different, if it's even covered at all. And I would have also, encouraged other young people to take care of themselves too, and know that it's not selfish to invest in yourself and take care of yourself. It's necessary, because if the movement is developed by young people and it's made up of predominantly young people, because of that, it's not selfish of you to take care of yourself. It's necessary because you're part of the movement, and you have to take care of yourself to do your part in taking care of the movement. Because if you're not, you're putting a drain on your friends, and highlighting the importance of community in order to build resilience, and having truly good friendships and validation from those friendships is really key in building up that resilience to come back after setbacks.
Yeah, David, sorry, we had a bit of audio pollution. did you have any specific teachers or mentors along the way? I know in our journey for Citizen, we had many, especially Mr. Michael Reardon, but what were the role of those teachers or mentors that might have helped you?
Yeah, I mean, I had some really amazing teachers. For example, like I have dyslexia and I have ADD, so I got the double whammy of 2 learning disabilities. And as a result, I was in some special ed classes throughout middle school and elementary school. And it was only because of teachers like one of my 8th grade teachers, Miss White, that helped believe in me, that enabled me to believe enough in myself to know that, even though I had to work a lot harder than other students that don't have learning disabilities, that it is possible. I think some of my mentors in the gun violence prevention movement that have been incredibly helpful have been people like Erica Ford in New York City, who helped set up the New York City crisis management system and violence intervention programs and she's been doing the work in Jamaica, Queens for, basically 20 years at this point. And, I think some good mentors that I've had as well are people that, have been on my board members that I serve with in the organization. And, also like Marshall Gans, who's a big organizer and like kind of academic. He teaches at Harvard, has been somewhat of a mentor to me. And I think everyone in March to some extent through his educational materials and stuff, in teaching us how to organize through the snowflake model and organize through our collective narrative to help tell stories and use that to motivate ourselves. So those have been some of my biggest mentors. My sister's been a big one too, frankly.
David, how do you balance being a Poli-Sci major at Harvard and helping to lead this national organization?
Yeah, well, actually, I don't know what I'm going to concentrate in yet. I think I'm probably leaning towards history with the secondary in government, but we'll figure it out. Frankly, it's delegation. At this point last year, I was exhausted. I was working, I was trying to be a full-time student and working like 40 hours a week because March did not have the necessary staff at the time. A lot of the kids of the other young people on the board too were working a massive amount, and it was not sustainable. But in that time since, our staff has grown basically immensely to help us manage that. And as a result of that delegation, as a result of our executive director, Alexis, and our staff, it's really, my workload has gone down a lot while I'm in school at least, because we now have staff that help prioritize this stuff. And it's only through effective delegation that I've been actually able to go to school and continue doing this work when possible at the same time while participating in it, right? You can't be everywhere at once. I wish it was possible to replicate yourself or clone yourself to do stuff at the same time, but sadly it's not. But really it's come down to delegation. And I think that's the key too, even if you're not in an organization as big as March, even if it's just a school-based, organization, effective delegation and being able to take a break is really key because, if you can't, it's what's called in organizing the center dot problem, which is when everyone relies on you for everything and you don't have an effective kind of bureaucracy or system of delegation in place. And by doing that, by having people focus, in our case on communications or fundraising or operations or planning or judicial advocacy or policy or any of the multitude of other things that we focus on. If we didn't do that, we wouldn't be able to do any of them because it just spread everybody too thin. So by enabling the people that you work with to specialize in their areas, it makes it a lot easier.
Yeah. In terms of having a social impact, who is one person that you admire and why?
I'm trying to think of some people. Honestly, I think Erica Ford, who's a big mentor of mine, and has been tremendously helpful in understanding my place and role, my comparatively tiny role in the movement in comparison to her and the work that she's done and many like Black and brown elders and veterans of the gun violence prevention movement, and frankly, the founders of the gun violence prevention movement have done for decades. And, I really look up to her because I've seen, I look up to her, but I also look up to someone named Pastor Mike in California, who leads another kind of gun violence prevention system that has resulted in basically I think like a 30 to 80% reduction in gun violence in communities within the Bay Area over the past 10 years in comparison to the rest of the country. But in the case of Erica and Pastor Mike, I really admire the work that they've done, because I've seen how they don't let people just get away with anything. They forcibly enter rooms and make people do what is necessary to help end gun violence in their communities through restorative justice programs and a public health-based approach to reducing for harm reduction. A lot of these kids that are in instances of gun violence, or even committing instances of gun violence a lot of the time, are under the age of 18. That's, sometimes they're even as young as 13 years old. And they need mentorship. These communities need resources. And we need to recognize the role that systemic racism and injustice has played in the creation of gun violence in Black and brown communities on a daily basis. The number one predictor of where it occurs most, is where communities were redlined in the 1930s and 40s by the federal government in discriminatory housing policies. And by looking to people like Erica, I've really seen what a dramatic impact you can have at reducing gun violence, and making people do what is necessary to recognize that people that die from gun violence aren't statistics, they're human beings.
David, you've mentioned teamwork, delegation a lot tonight. What I wanted to know is, for those in the audience who want to break down a similarly complicated issue to the one that you are tackling, what do you think the key to solving those issues are?
I think it's just persistence, and putting your energy in the right direction and having the right motivation, along with delegation. Of course, let me try to summarize. I think it's persistence that is enabled by taking care of yourself and basically building in the work that you do in organizing or working to create social change as part of your routine. Once a year, even if all you do is, just vote or register someone else to vote, do it in an annual process. So taking care of yourself and planning is a big deal, and building effective bureaucracy and or just organizational structure in general is really key, even if it's a small level, because it ensures sustainability and helps spread out the weight of the duty that is on you, and realizing that, again, social change does not happen overnight, and it's really frustrating and hard to see that happen. There will be setbacks, and there are setbacks, but it's only through persistence that this change actually comes. But the key to that persistence is you building a good community around you, having the right motivation, and taking care of yourself, and seeing that as part of creating social change by investing in yourself, because you're investing in the movement. And it's great if you can it's great if you can work 18 hours a day for 2 years straight, but if you burn out and it's really going to take 2 decades, to solve this issue, it's kind of sabotaging yourself in the long run. So you got to take care of yourself. And you got to know it's okay to step back at times and then step back in or step out. It's okay for me. I feel okay to step back when I need to take care of myself, to go to therapy, to get 8 hours of sleep, to go to school, because I know that Erica is doing the work in Jamaica, Queens, to end gun violence, and there are people across the country doing it in March, which could be all of you guys, by the way. You can create a chapter at marchforourlives.com, shameless plug. It's through seeing these other people that are doing the work that I know that I can take a step back. And by me putting in the work too, they know that they can take a step back, because there's no one leader of the gun violence prevention movement. There's no one leader of any movement. Most movements, frankly, are fueled by just everyday people putting in the work to create change and working together to create a better world, through righteous indignation, and a love and persistent commitment to justice.
David, you're now entering or beginning your sophomore year at Harvard. You've organized one of the largest protests in American history, and you've traveled across the nation to hundreds of cities, all to enact the change you believe in. You're only 20, so what's next for you?
Honestly, I kind of want to be a college student for the moment, and be okay with that. I've worked really hard, and I'm going to continue working really hard. But I also want to be part of me taking care of myself and leading, through example. Although I am by no means the only leader whatsoever. You know, I got to show that it's okay to take a step back at times if you want to focus on your education. And that, again, that doesn't mean I'm going to stop in any way. I'm still doing this work. I'm working through the summers and stuff. But when it comes to like, I got to study for this midterm I've been procrastinating on, or this astronomy homework, like I'm going to do it, and not feel guilty about it, because I know that I got to be in this for the long term, and that means investing in my education so that I can create a more tolerant world. I saw on tour, when we went around the country with some of the people that would protest us and were armed, that the source of so much hatred and I feel like intolerance that we see in this country. And that doesn't mean that we should be, by the way, like by tolerance, I mean, love and compassion for everyone, but also not, that doesn't mean being tolerant of the intolerant, right? We have to work against the people that hate other people because of the color of their skin, that hate other people because of their religion, that hate other people because of any of those, defining characteristics of them. And work to, at least in my past, I realized through talking to a lot of those people that frankly said, that they hated me, or that they wanted to kill me, or that, that they hated us and thought that we were terrible people that were controlled, or whatever. By talking to those people and explaining what we actually stand for, and like actually getting them to agree to some of this stuff, and at times making them cry, I realized that really the source of so much hatred and intolerance is simply a lack of knowledge and people not being able to learn. It's people holding up their egos too high and not realizing that it's just as important to be able to admit when you're wrong as knowing when you're right, and being able to learn from that. And I realized from that really education is a key component, not only for myself but for everyone, to create a more just society. So that we can educate each other on how everyone has been affected by the systemic issues of gun violence, of injustice in general, of systemic racism and poverty and militarism that has harmed so many in this country.
Thank you all for participating in the inaugural event of the Citizen Speaker Series, featuring Scholarship Speaker David Hogg. Our next event will be featuring CEO and co-founder of Mocha Origins, Jeff Abella. And Mocha Origins is an impact-focused coffee and chocolate company based here in Pennsylvania. That'll be on November 18th, and more details for registration, which will be in person in the Duffy Center, will be available soon on our Instagram @Citizen. Also on our Instagram, you'll find our new podcast soon called My Citizen Moment, which profiles Malvern Prep students making their own impact here on campus. I'm glad we were able to celebrate and share David's personal story of impact, and I hope we inspired you in the audience to find your citizen moment. Thank you.